What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. I'm Isaiah, and I invite you again to grab a seat, a snack, and a tasty beverage. And let me talk at you for a minute. Today, we're going to talk about this game, Dragons Rampant, from Osprey Publishing by Daniel Mercy. I'm not really sure where I got this rulebook from, but since I have it, let's talk about it. So the game is a fantasy army-based, army-sized game. It's the fantasy version of the game Lions Rampant by the same author and also through Osprey. It's mostly minis agnostic. They do give you some lists for things, but let's go through here step by step, see what we got. And the list of what you need is pretty basic. Obviously the book, a table profile, list of unit profiles. Model-wise, you're looking at 60 or fewer models for a full-size game, it says, and then 12 D6 per player, as well as a tape measure in inches and some markers to represent some specific things that can happen to your units. So not a long list, and it's meant, the beauty of it, it's a mini agnostic army game, so any fantasy army that you've got sitting around on the shelf that may not be good in another game or may not be feeling it somewhere, maybe you can crack that off the shelf and give it some new life and a chance to be victorious in a new system. Love those kinds of options. So the game recommends 24 points, and in that 24 points, there's a very, very loose, I wouldn't even call it a force organization, just some basic, simple requirements you have to meet. You got to have at least 4 units, but no more than 10 units. The individual cost of a unit can't be greater than 10 or less than 1. And some or all of your units may be single models or reduced model units, fielding fewer models, but still counting as full strength. Kind of like how in Kings of War, it doesn't necessarily have to be the full thing. It's just got to be represented, and you got to have a way to keep up with it because their strength is still going to be the same, 12, just fewer models represented. If you don't really have enough models to make up 24 points, definitely have it, he says, have it to go at 12 or 18, or if you got a lot of models, have it to go at 30 or 36. So there's a lot of leeway to scale the rules up or down. It's meant for 28 millimeter, but obviously with anything, you could very easily play this in 10 or 15 millimeter by just swapping inches for centimeters, playing on a smaller board. It doesn't mention that I've seen how big of a board you need. I would assume 4x4 for the regular size game, and then maybe 6x4 for the full game, or maybe 6x4 for a 24 point game. I'm not entirely sure. If you play and you're familiar, let me know in the comments how big of a table do you use. Cut that. Strength is the stat and verbiage used to represent the health of your units. If it's a big unit, it'll have 12 points of strength with 12 models, and then you remove a model each time it loses a point of strength. For a smaller unit, it'd be 6, and then obviously you can adjust that if you have like a unit of trolls or something. One troll can represent a few different strength, and then once it's reduced to 0 health, it's gone, or 0 strength. Look at me, already using the wrong words. 0 strength, it's gone. Now, when keeping up with your strength, bear in mind that being above or below half strength does play a factor in the game. So make sure you've got a clear way to represent and know who's at what that's not going to get knocked over or accidentally picked up. That's why I personally don't like using dice to keep up with health units. I'm too much in the habit of just picking them up and rattling them around in my hand or whatever, and then I don't remember how many health the thing had. But that's just me. Do what's best for you, obviously. Moving into the different unit types and some of their stats, we start with leaders. Now, a leader is exactly what it sounds like. It can be merged into a unit. If you do it that way, it doesn't increase the strength of the unit. Or it can be represented as a standalone or reduced strength unit and just stand on its own. Your leader will have a randomly determined trait, and there's a chart for it. Love this. Love that it's whatever you're going to get is random, because it reduces the amount of min-maxing that can really be accomplished in a game. So I'm a big fan of that. It looks like a 3d6 roll because the chart is 3 through 18. And then his ability applies for, I think, 12 inches. Most of them have a 12-inch bubble. The stat blocks for the individual units have a lot on them, but it's all fairly self-explanatory. You've got attacks, move, shoots, courage, armor, points, attack value, defense value, shoot value, movement maximum movement, their initial strength points, and then any special rules that they may have. And while the stat block has a lot on it, there's a completely ample number of unit types, but it's not overdone. There's a reasonable number. You've got, 3 different kinds of mounted: elite, heavy, and light. That can represent pretty much any model in your collection. You got greater and lesser war beasts. And then into your foot units, you have elite, heavy, light, bellicose, because they're fancy, I guess. And then heavy missiles, light middles, and then horde units. Straightforward, and everything tells you how big it is and how much it costs. Very straightforward. Love that. Love that. Anything with a new thing, especially with models that I already have, I like it to be a little bit loose. I don't need it completely to be 120% dialed in on one-to-one representations. Just let me pick what I want this stuff to be. That way I can get more use out of more things that have been sitting on the shelf for more amounts of time. I really want to play my lizards in this. That's the army. That's always the fantasy army that I always look forward to breaking out, is my lizards. We then move into the rules of battle, and I love that this section opens up with a list of things that you need to be aware of. Some of them basic, some of them just good pieces of information, like 6-sided dice. Dice for combat and things like that are individual, but for orders and courage tests, they're together, cumulative. High dice good, low dice bad. Each model is supposed to, if you're playing by the book, represent one war without using reduced units or anything like that. All measurements in inches. Round down fractions, unless otherwise noted. That's always a good one to have up front and center, is round up, round down, or actually take the fraction, because it's different everywhere you go. And then there's no unit facing, so everybody can see in every direction. I like unit facing, but I like it more in skirmish games than in army games. Unit cohesion works by selecting a model. So you use a banner bearer or a musician. At the end of their movement, all the models have to be within 3 inches of that center model. Or I don't think he has to stay in the center because it's not rank and flake. Or I don't think it has to be. I don't think it is. I'm sure you can play it that way. 3 inches is also the distance that you have to stay away from all other units unless you are attacking them. We then move into terrain, of which there are 5 types: rough, obstacles, obscuring, cover, and impassable. Rough terrain slows you down. You don't swing as well in it. Obstacles just kind of slow you down while you get over them. Obscuring terrain will completely prevent line of sight. Cover will reduce casualties, and impassable is obviously you can't pass it. To gain cover, you have to have the majority of models, but in this game, the terrain effects are not done by the whole unit. They're model to model basis, so you could have some models that are benefiting and some models that aren't. Normally, cover will give you 1 point of armor, but you can elect with your opponent to elect some pieces of terrain to count as superb cover, which will grant a bonus of 2 instead of the usual 1. And then we wrap up the kind of prep pages with the leader rules. So he's part of a unit, cannot leave it. He moves and fights as an ordinary model. He will always be the last model to die in his unit. He gives +1 to all total courage roll tests within 12 inches. Leader traits may affect the things above that we just mentioned. And leader rules are only in effect if the leader is alive and on the battlefield. Once you've gathered all the things and you're ready to hit the table, the turn is set up to have kind of a fumble system built in where you may not get to activate all of your units. I'm a big fan of that in games because it makes you think a little bit harder about priority and which units need to get where to do what. there is an order to which you try to activate things. So the first is to try to rally any battered units. Battered units are battered when they have less than half their strength. Activate wild charges, which are specifically said in the stat lines, I believe. And then order other activations, which is taking, I believe, a courage test to activate. I'm not exactly certain about that. I'm still looking, but I'm pretty sure it's a courage test. And if you're greater than their value on 2d6, they get to activate as normal. If you fail, your activation ends and it passes to the other player. But let's start with rallying. So rallying battered units is a courage test, which will have some modifiers to it, which is unfortunate. Well, I mean, not unfortunate, but it's potentially unfortunate for your units depending on how badly they're beat up. If they pass, they remove the battered marker. They're good, but they can't activate later in the turn during your ordered activation phase. If you are unsuccessful, they keep the battered marker, lose a point of strength, and then retreat towards their closest table edge, I would imagine. I was correct. Wild charge is a special rule, and if you start within charge range of an enemy, you have to charge them according to that rule. If you take your courage test, you're to activate. If you're successful, you immediately carry out the attack activation, and if you're unsuccessful, then you remain stationary and take no further action. But a failed wild charge does not end your activation phase. You can keep going after that. Then you pass to your ordered activations, which is again courage tests to activate them and see if they can do something. Their options are to move, shoot, or attack. Some units may have some special rules, such as skirmish, fantastical action, which could be like casting a spell or flying somewhere, or to make a reaction to your action, such as counter charge or evade. Your activation phase can end in up to 3 different ways. If you fail an ordered activation test, if you've activated all your units, or if you've tested all units and wild chargers and you just decide that you don't want to activate anybody else. Maybe you want to see what they're going to do and get a little bit more information before you commit to anything. I like that you have the option to just not. If you choose to move, it's pretty basic. I love that it has universal distances that things move. So light riders and lesser war beasts are 12 inches. All other mounted things are 10 inches. Your bellicose, lightfoot, and scouts are 8 inches, and everybody else on foot is 6 inches. I love universal movements. I love it when just everything, if you can look at it and you can know how far it moves. Love that. We then come to the shooting option, which is pretty straightforward. Be able to see it, line of sight, which is full 360. So got a pretty good chance to be able to see them. Shoot, so everybody's rolling their dice looking for their shoot stat. You reduce the target unit's strength, and then the target unit tests courage as needed. You have to test courage whenever you lose strength from an attack, because to see if they break and run. Ranges are pretty much universal, so any foot missiles are 18. Scouts mounted or weighty are 12, and short range are 6. So again, you can very quickly look at a unit and know what its threat range is. Love that. When you go to roll your dice, and I touched on it briefly, but we'll go a little bit deeper. You get 12 dice if you are above half of your starting value, 6 dice if the unit is at half. If the target is more than 12 inches away, it is a -1 to each dice that you roll. Any result that is equal or better than the unit shoot is a hit. Terrain in the game and cover does not affect your ability to shoot. It improves their ability to defend by giving them an armor bonus. Now, as you hit them and deal damage, there is a scale for removing strength depending on how many times they've been hit. So if it's armor 1, it's 1 model for every damage. Armor 2, 1 model for every 2 hits. Armor 3, 1 model for every 3 hits. Armor 4, 1 model for every 4 hits. And then cover, again, increases your armor by 1. I like that system. I think it's good. That makes it bloody, but you're not going to feel like you're going to get just absolutely mowed through right away in a lot of situations. If you spent, more points for better equipped units, they're not just going to get absolutely tabled right away. I like that a lot. When you want to get up close with your wet work, we have just your good old-fashioned meat grinder melee attacks. So you choose your unit, take your test, move them into contact, which is just moving all the models in the unit, their full move distance, getting them into contact. Fight. The attacking unit will use its attack value, and the unit being attacked will use its defense value. Both sides reduce strength points. Units test courage if required, and then if both units are still in contact, one unit will retreat. There's no charge arcs or facing. As long as one of your models in the unit can see the enemy before at the beginning of the activation, you're fair to charge. And with shooting and moving, your models in that unit do not hinder line of sight or anything like that, which is good. That's a hassle when that's a thing in the game. And when you're moving your models in, obviously the goal is to get as many of them into base to base as possible, but if some of them don't quite get into base to base, don't sweat it too hard, because regardless of who's touching, everybody's going to swing. If the unit that you are charging has a counterattack or evade special rule, when you target them is when they activate that and carry out that reaction to the extent of whatever's written for it. And then your unit activates, if it's still able to, able to do the thing. Just like with shooting, you get 12 dice if you're above half, and 6 dice if you are half or below. Once you figured out how many dice you're going to roll, everybody rolls, and any dice that are equal to or greater than your attacking value if you're the attacker, or the defending value if you're the defender, are a hit and will cause damage. And then damage is calculated the same as for shooting. 1 strength point if it's armor 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Leftover hits are ignored. Cover increases armor by 1. Now, if you're attacking in rough or difficult terrain, everybody in that combat swings at an attack and defense of 5 up. At the end of attacks, anybody who took casualties has to take courage tests, and then if they're still in contact, somebody's going to run away. It's going to be whoever lost the most strength points must retreat. If it's an equal or no lost strength points, the attacking unit will retreat. No units are allowed to be within 3 inches of each other at the end of everything. And if a unit cannot fall back the required distance because of terrain or other units or whatever, it tests for casualties as shown later in the retreat section. We then come to when and how to test courage, which we've touched on a little bit, but we'll go through here and make sure that what I said was at least mostly correct, I hope. So you have to test anytime you lose strength to attacks or shooting, when you're attempting to rally, when your unit is the only unit remaining on the table, if your leader is killed or flees the table, and if your warband has had more army points of its units removed from play, more than half of your total army removed from play. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are some modifiers for courage rolls. So it's -1 for each strength point the unit has lost so far. Another one if your warband is at half or more points gone. You get 1 if your leader's within 12 inches. And your final score should equal or better the unit's courage test. Now up here, that section before, the strength points, the rally, and the only unit on the table, those only affect the unit that it's happening to. The last 2 things, having your army reduced to half or less points, or your leader being killed or fleeing, that affects every unit on the table. Alright, if your leader runs away, it makes sense that you should panic a little bit and maybe flee. And there are varying degrees to how badly you can fail a courage test. If your final result is still at least a positive number, then you retreat and you gain a battered token. But if your final result is 0 or less, you rout and run away immediately. If you were already battered and you get another battered result, you lose an additional strength point when you retreat. So I assume you automatically lose 1. So when you retreat, you are moving at half your normal movement. You have to get at least 3 inches away. Now, if there's open field in front of you as you're running straight away from the unit that made you run and tuck tail, then you just move everybody the minimum distance to get them 3 inches away. However, if you are unable to move away because of terrain or because of other units, because you still got to stay 3 inches away from everybody, then you're going to roll a dice. And compare it to your courage. If it is less than your courage value, then you lose that many strength points as you're just kind of harried from the back. That's the only situation where you would be allowed to remain within 3 inches of another unit. And if in the course of your frenzied fleeing, any models in a unit happen to cross that edge of the table border, the unit is removed. The end of the game is determined, the victor in the game is determined by the amount of glory amassed, which is determined by the scenario. And it says to play until you have a turn where there are 4 or fewer units, and then roll a dice at the start of every turn. If the score is higher than the number of units, that's the final turn. Get in there, get the glory while you can. We then come into fantastical rules, which are your special rules, and also things like cleric and caster, things that you can pay extra points to give a unit to beef them up or make them better, or to sink some points if you need to. Big fan of stuff like this because it's not attached to an individual stat block. You know what I mean? You could pick whoever you wanted to pay the points and give them those rules to make them into the unit that you want them to be. And I like that. We then come into scenarios. We got 6 scenarios. And I don't believe there is a way of linking games. There may be some supplements that have some campaign play, but in this book, I don't think there's a way to link those games other than obviously your own imagination. But what I mean to say is there's no built-in progression system, which is fine. It's not really always necessary. It's nice, but it's not necessary. And then it gives you some sample warband lists to represent potential different things. Now, these are just kind of like if you and your buddy are new to the game, grab one of these, figure out the models that fit it, and then have a go at the game. And then gives you opportunity to get the game on the table while still learning the best way to build out your list and the things that you want. But there's a lot of variety in here, from lizards to gnomes to ratkins to and I quote, grr. All creatures great and small. Love it. And then we've got a quick reference on the last page of the book, which, as if you've ever watched any of my content, I will praise any author who puts a good quick reference in a book. It should always be there. Sweet. Final thoughts, kind of getting on towards the end of the video. I hope I'm not going to let myself talk too long. I love games like this. I know that I play a lot of skirmish games, and sometimes I talk smack about army games, but I really do like army games. They're very visually pleasing and they're a lot of fun. The problem with a lot of army games is that I don't want to have to obtain a PhD in order to be fluent in the rules. This game gives me that, is going to give me that army game feel that I like, without making me have to study this book for the next few years of my life to understand it. And I think it's going to be a good time. I like that the stat blocks and the things like that are very vague. They're just stats. You can apply whatever skin to them you want. And I love that because I have quite a few fantasy armies, and there's a lot of them that I just don't really get to play hardly ever. So I'm excited. I also love that there's no bespoke model line. It's just you just buy the book, and then whatever you've already got around your collection is good to go. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun as soon as I can find somebody to play it with me. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out, letting me talk at you for a little bit about Dragon Rampant. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day.